We've also been hearing from a French government official this morning. The Labour Minister, Olivier Dussopt, has been speaking and saying that the government is not in denial about the tensions. He claimed they simply want to move on now. Let's hear what he had to say earlier.
At the end of a conflict like this, a mobilization like this, we must not be in denial and think that everything will be forgotten. There's a before and an after, and a disagreement on the age at which people should retire. However, there are ways to renew a dialogue. In several weeks, I will present a new bill about employment and work, with questions about training, work conditions, and these are the subjects which we need to be discussing.
Well, I want to bring in Paul Smith, the Associate Professor, Head of French and Francophone Studies and the Head of the Department at the Faculty of Arts at the University of Nottingham. Paul, hello. Let's start. I mean, you've been a seasoned observer now of these strikes and the various ones. How are you seeing today's in comparison to those previous?
Well, this is a test of strength, isn't it? That both from the union's point of view and the government, that the numbers that turn out today in the protest will be significant. They'll be very closely monitored to see whether the unions are still able to mobilise people, or whether the government is probably hoping that there will not be a very big turnout today, and that the protest will be over and done with maybe by the weekend or the middle of next week. So this is really an acid test on both sides, both for the trade unions and for the government.
There seems to be a sense of slightly turbocharging the energy after the use of 493 and using these special constitutional powers, avoiding a vote in Parliament to bring through these reforms. Now, when you watched President Macron do the interview yesterday, 35 minutes, where he set about justifying again why he's taking the steps, pointing to other European countries, do you sense that argument is being heard at all in France, having any effect?
It doesn't seem to be, does it? He seemed to double down on the process, on the use of 49.3 and on the process of the bill never having been voted on in the National Assembly, either in its first reading or ahead of 49.3, because of the use of that process. It was also quite an odd interview in some ways, sort of comparing the continued opposition to the events on the US Capitol in January of 2021, which I don't think did very much to calm things down, but also suggesting that trade unions in France hadn't been willing to discuss. And we heard the Labour Minister, the Employment Minister this morning talking about discussions. Well, the trade unions would say that the government hasn't been very good at dialogue, and a lot of people in France feel that hasn't been the case.
Another thing that President Macron mentioned was the fact that he said previous governments, previous leaders have swept this on the carpet. They've just let the dust settle. I could have done that. This is not a pleasure. This is not a luxury. It's an absolute necessity. And yet here we are still. What strikes me is you're talking to us today from the UK. When people from the outside observe what's going on in France, is there some confusion? Is there an understanding outside looking in on this?
Well, I think there are always two things, aren't there? I mean, there are people in the UK thinking, good heavens, look at this. They're pushing the pension age up to 64. And there are the French out there protesting. But I think that there's a misapprehension on the part, certainly of a British audience, of just the centrality, the importance of the state across the piece, but also in terms of pensions, that a very large proportion of the population will be relying on those pensions, that the level of pension support provided by the state is much higher. We're much more used to the idea of separate pension pots, but in France you have a situation, of course, where the pension system is much more complicated, but also it's a bigger proportion. It's something like twice the levels of support for a pension if you get the full pension that you would get in the UK. So I think there's a bit of this misunderstanding, but also a certain amount of envy that the trade unions can mobilise such large numbers and have so much popular support. Although, having said that, it seems to me that at the moment we're going through a phase of strikes here in the UK that do have popular support, and that's why the government here is tending to back off.
Whenever I walk around streets of Paris, get a coffee in between the rubbish that's piling up, or speaking to people in the office, I tend to hear a similar thing, which is, OK, when's the next one? How long is this going to go on for? There's this uncertainty about it all. When you're stepping back, looking at this, are you spotting any patterns of where this could go?
Well, one of the patterns I'm kind of thinking of is the gilets jaunes. I mean, I wouldn't want to be a policeman or a CRS in France at the moment because they're going to be very, very busy over the next few weeks and months. And what concerns me, I mean, what you were saying earlier about Macron yesterday saying we can't sweep things under the carpet. He's kind of saying we're into a new phase of government, that in the past, when there's been a big strike movement, governments have actually backed down. Everybody's talked about the need for change. We can't afford this. And then we try to change things and then we back down. And several presidents, Sarkozy, Hollande, have kind of backed down over key things. Chirac did it back in 1995. So Macron's saying, I'm not backing down. So, we might indeed be gearing up for a year or two of quite muscular, as the French would say, quite musclé confrontations between the government and the trade unions.
Paul Smith, French analyst and professor at the University of Nottingham, thank you for joining us, as always.